He felt the weight settle on his shoulders. 60 pounds of polished steel. He was a tank, a fortress of iron. Across the field, through the cold rain, he saw them. A few thousand commoners. Sick, starving men, hiding behind a fence of sharpened sticks. They looked like skeletons. They were archers, peasants. He and his brothers, they were knights. The nobility of France. Thousands of them. A forest of lances. A wave of heavy horse and plated steel. Their armor made them invincible. Their blood made them superior. The trumpets sounded. The ground began to tremble. The glorious charge began. This would not be a battle. It would be an execution. They had no idea what was really planned. They did not understand the mud. They did not understand the you. And they did not know. They were already dead. We are venturing into a darkness others are afraid to see. Subscribe to walk this path with us. Hit the bell. Let it be your signal when we unseal the next forbidden chapter. And now, back to the story. The charge was the only story that mattered. For 1,000 years, the rule of the battlefield was absolute. A mounted knight, encased in 60 pounds of articulated steel, was a mobile fortress. He was the tank. He was the shock weapon. His purpose was to break the enemy line through sheer, brutal force. His armor was high technology, forged by masters. It could defeat swords, spears, and the low-power crossbows of the time. The man inside was a professional, trained from birth to kill. He was stronger, faster, and backed by God. He was noble. This was the public myth, the foundation of the medieval world. On the other side, at Agincourt, was the English army. They were not knights. They were commoners, yeomen, sick with dysentery, starving. They had been marching for weeks, trying to escape to a safe port. Now they were trapped. The French had them outnumbered. 5, perhaps 6 to 1. The numbers were almost insulting. The French nobles blocked the valley. They formed up in 3 massive waves or battles, thousands of knights and men-at-arms ready to ride down the English pigs. The plan was simple, honorable. The first wave would charge. It would shatter the English line. The second wave would dismount and butcher the survivors. The field was a freshly plowed patch of earth, hemmed in by 2 forests. The rain had been falling for days. The ground was soft, a minor inconvenience. The trumpets sounded. The glorious charge began. The story everyone knows is that the English archers, with their yew longbows, unleashed a storm of arrows. The knights fell. Armor was punctured. Horses panicked. The age of the knight was ended by the common man, a David and Goliath story. A tale of peasant bravery against aristocratic arrogance. It was a brutal, simple system. The arrow beat the armor. The end. Or so it seemed. But there was one detail that made no sense. The English weren't just standing there. They had spent the morning hammering thousands of 6-foot sharpened stakes into the ground, pointed toward the French. This was not a battle. It was a trap. The French knights saw the stakes. They saw the narrow, muddy field, and they charged anyway. They were not stupid. So why? The story was neat. It was tidy. And it was a lie. The myth is clean. It is a story of technology. The English yew longbow, a super weapon. The French plate armor, obsolete. This is the myth we are sold. It is a story of progress. The common man, with his simple, powerful tool, defeats the arrogant noble in his expensive, clumsy suit. It is the end of an era. The arrow simply pierced the steel. One technology replacing another. Clean, simple. A revolution in an afternoon. This is the first lie. It is the biggest one. We have the armor. We test it. We recreate 15th century high-grade steel plate. It is not clumsy. It is high technology. It is articulated, brilliant, and it works. It is designed specifically to defeat arrows. To penetrate a high-quality breastplate, an English bodkin arrowhead must be flying at maximum velocity. It must strike a flat, non-angled surface. It must hit at a perfect 90-degree angle. The physics do not work. The idea of thousands of arrows fired in high arcs, landing with this perfect armor-piercing geometry, is a fantasy, a statistical impossibility. It's a lie. The French knights knew this. They trusted their armor. They were not afraid of the arrows. This is the second crack. The myth shows a glorious cavalry run, a thunder of hooves, thousands of horses shattering the English line. This is also a lie. The French nobles saw the field. They were not fools. They saw the sharpened stakes. They saw the mud. They ordered the first massive wave to dismount, to advance on foot. They would walk, shoulder to shoulder, a shield wall of plated steel. They would push the English off the field. A solid, simple plan. Except for the field. The Valley of Agincourt was freshly plowed farmland. It had been raining for days. The ground was not just muddy, it was a cold, thick, heavy soup of clay. A quagmire. The French line began to walk. 1,000 yards. Imagine this. You are in 60 pounds of steel. You take a step. Your metal boot sinks 6 inches. You pull it free. The mud creates a vacuum. It sucks at you. You take another step. Sink. Pull. For 1,000 yards. The charge was not a charge. It was a slow, stumbling, exhausting wade. It took them agonizing minutes. By the time they reached the English line, the first wave of French knights, the flower of chivalry, was utterly gassed. They were breathless, staggering. They could barely lift their arms. The English watched them come. They saw the invincible knights, stumbling like drunkards. And now, the arrows. The English archers were not aiming for the armor. They didn't need to. They aimed at the horses of the few knights who did ride. A horse, wounded, goes insane. It rears, it falls, crushing its rider. It thrashes, turning the mud into a red slurry. They aimed at the faces. The visor slits were tiny, but there were thousands of arrows. An arrow in the eye, the throat, a scream of pain, and the men on foot. The archers just shot at them, to make them drop their heads, to make them trip, to break their balance. The arrows were not the killing weapon. They were the herding weapon. They were the tool used to make the knights fall down. The public myth of the magic arrow was horrific, but the truth was worse. They fell. They fell forward, face first, into the clay. The arrows did not kill them. The mud killed them. A man in 60 pounds of steel cannot get up easily. A man in 60 pounds of steel, face down in a foot of thick mud with no traction, cannot get up at all. He cannot lift his head. The weight of the helmet, the breastplate, it pushes him down. He tries to push up. His metal-gloved hands just sink into the cold ooze. He finds no purchase. He opens his mouth to scream. The mud slides in, thick, gritty. It fills his throat. It stops his breath. He is drowning, drowning in a field. Around him, his brothers, thousands of them. The first wave. They are not fighting. They are floundering. They are dying. This was not a battle line. It was a pile. The French knights were trapped, encased in their own invincibility. Their armor was now their iron coffin. They suffocated, slowly. The gurgling sounds were awful. The English line watched. They waited. They held the line. They watched the greatest army in Christendom drown in dirt. And then they moved. The archers, the sick, starving, low-born peasants, the men the knights had come to execute. They dropped their bows. They pulled out their hatchets, their butcher's knives, their long, thin daggers called misericords, the mercy blades. They waded into the pile of living, dying, suffocating men. This was not a battle. It was an extermination. The horror wasn't a quick death from a magic arrow. The horror was a slow erasure. The peasants, unarmored, were light. They could walk on the mud. The knights could not. The archers moved among them. They found a gap in the armor. The visor slit. The armpit. The groin. They pushed the daggers in. Quick. Brutal. Like slaughtering pigs. They pulled the helmets off choking men and bashed their skulls in with lead mallets. No honor. No ransom. Just butchery. The second French wave saw this. They saw their brothers, the highest nobility of France, being executed by commoners. They were horrified. They charged. And the same thing happened. The English arrows herded them. The mud caught them. They fell. They piled on top of the first wave, dead on top of the dying. The entire French nobility was being systematically disassembled. This was the true mechanism. Inhuman, precise. But why? Why create the lie? Why invent the story of the magic arrow? Why pretend it was a clean, technological fight? The lie wasn't to protect the victims. The lie was to protect the victors. The English. The lie was to hide the real reason the Age of Knights ended, to hide the terrible, simple truth of what they had done. The lie was not just to hide the shame of how the French died, it was to hide the shame of why they died. The Age of Knights was built on one single sacred rule: ransom. War was not about extermination, it was about business. A knight was a financial asset. You did not kill a captured knight, a lord, a duke. You captured him. You treated him with honor. And you sold him back to his family for a fortune. This was the entire social and economic structure of the nobility. At Agincourt, the battle was effectively over. The first two French waves were gone. The English, exhausted, moved across the field. They began the real work, pulling living, valuable knights from the mud, sorting the prisoners, calculating the profit. Thousands of French nobles were taken alive. They had surrendered. They were prisoners of war. They were worth, in modern terms, hundreds of millions of dollars. Then, a rumor. A small party of Frenchmen, perhaps led by a local lord, had attacked the English baggage train at the rear. It was a minor, desperate raid. But King Henry V panicked. He saw a new French army reforming. He looked at his own tiny, exhausted force, and he looked at the thousands of prisoners they were now guarding. He could not fight a new battle and guard these men. They were a threat. So he gave an order so cold, so brutal, it violated 1,000 years of tradition. Execute them. Execute all of them. This was not the heat of battle. This was a cold, pragmatic, economic decision. The English knights refused. They would not do it. It was against the code of chivalry. It was against God. And it was financial suicide. They were disgusted by the order. So Henry V turned to the men who had already proven their worth. the men who were not bound by chivalry, the commoners, the archers. He ordered them to carry out the massacre, and they did. They walked among the captured, disarmed, helpless French nobility, the greatest lords of France, and slaughtered them with axes, with mallets, with knives. This is the true purpose of the public myth. The lie of the magic arrow was invented to hide this, to hide a war crime. It hid the fact that the English king ordered the cold-blooded execution of thousands of helpless prisoners. It hid the fact that his own nobles refused the order. It hid the fact that he used peasants to murder the very concept of nobility. The public myth, the arrows killed them, was a lie agreed upon by both sides. The French used it to hide the fact that they were suffocated by mud and butchered by peasants. The English used it to hide the fact that their great, chivalrous king was a war criminal. The Age of Knights did not end because of a new weapon. It ended because in one afternoon the rules died. The entire system of honor, ransom, and class was revealed as a fragile fraud. It was drowned in mud and finished with a butcher's knife. The knight in his 60 pounds of steel believed he was invincible. He believed in the myth of his superiority. He believed in the rules of honorable war. He was wrong. So what ended the Age of Knights? It was not the arrow. That was the public myth. It was the mud, a thick, cold clay that filled his lungs and made his armor a 60-pound coffin. It was the peasant's knife. The mercy blade pushed through his visor, not for mercy, but for extermination. This was not a battle. It was a butchering. The lie of the magic arrow was created by both sides to hide this shame, to hide the true purpose, the English king's cold-blooded massacre of thousands of surrendered prisoners. The real horror wasn't the arrow storm. It was the moment a commoner realized the knight was just meat. The real horror was the lie. We have recorded another chapter, but the darkness in this chronicle is endless. If you believe this must be remembered, subscribe to this archive. Press like as your seal upon this record, and hit the bell. Let it toll for those whose names we must remember.